Well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad you could make it today for our second segment. I know we have some folks online, so welcome. I'm glad you guys were able to participate. Looks like everybody's got their meals. That's a really good idea. I think we're going to start passing those out during all employee luncheons. It's a really good idea. Especially maybe Murray needs that in case anybody's going to throw anything at. No, just kidding. No, we are. You are in for a treat. Our second segment is building off of John's presentation. So we're going to go into more, of that history of United Water, and we're very fortunate because there's no one better to put on this presentation. I think Murray. Murray's our supervising hydrologist. For those who don't know him, he'll be up here. I know there's a lot of new faces and new employees, and again, that's why we decided to do this. It was just seemed like a really good idea. We got some employees that some have been here for a few years that really haven't had a chance to go back, and some very new employees that we've hired on. And I think it's really important to understand where we've come from, what we're doing, and where we're going. Really to embrace the mission and the vision of the organization. So with that, I'll go ahead and bring up Mr. Murray McEachron, and we'll go underway.
Okay, something a little unrelated is by tomorrow morning, we should have surpassed 100,000 acre feet of diversions this year. So it's a nice big mile marker. It's been a long time. In a way, you should be clapping to O&M because they're the ones who have been making it happen. So anyway. All right, so I'm going to ask the group here if somebody can give me the name of probably who was the most responsible for the formation of United Water and its predecessors. What person's name? No, but who was the one here who formed it? Who is our kind of the father of this district? Nope. Nope. See, I had this bottle of soda here I was going to give away. I surely hope somebody can get it. Let me let me read some of his biography right here. Let's see, he's father of 3 children. He settled Santa Paula in 1893. He's a Mason. He's been president of many nationally known organizations: the California Fruit Growers Exchange, Fruit Growers Supplier Company, California State Chamber of Commerce, McKevitt Corporation, California Walnut Growers Association. In fact, he started that. The Teague McKevitt Company, Santa Paula Water Works, former irrigation company, Thermal Belt Irrigation, Rancho La Cuesta, and so forth. Anyway, it just kept on going. No. Anyway, what's that? Close. CCT, yes. All right, there you go. Bottle of soda for Tony. Okay. Anyway, so when I was putting this together, I was kind of looking for a theme or a saying or something, and because John took all the talking heads sayings, I had to find something else, and I found one that you're probably all familiar with. It really fit this presentation well, and it was something that Mark Twain said, and that was, "Whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over." And we were formed based on getting ready to fight. We've been fighting pretty much ever since. And I'll be talking a lot about the fighting. That's not important as why we were fighting, what we were fighting for. And hopefully you guys can walk away with what we fight for rather than all these individual fights that we've had, because we've had a lot of them in the past, and we've been very fortunate to have been very good at it and winning. And then therefore we have what we have down here in this county. So anyway, so as I go on, So I'm going to be describing some events, and they're going to be taking place in terms of hydrology and the rainfall. And this is something John showed you a much longer period for. I think he showed it from the 1700s to present. But just so we can know, when I show you this graph, this is the individual rainfall years right here. And then this is a 10-year running average of rainfall. So anytime it's going up, we're going through a wet period. Anytime it's going down, we're going through a dry period or even a drought. And usually by the end of the bottom of them, that's when we call them droughts. So again, wet periods, dry periods. And we're going to start off, I'm not going to go back I'm going to go back about a little over 150 years or so. And it's kind of the end of the Rancho era, and kind of talking about the Anglo-American movement that was coming into this area. And so the ranchos really were divided up into very large parcels way back then. And they weren't always well described of the actual property that they owned. And, so let me give you an example right here. Is this corner right here was described as you go through the river and you go to a large oak tree. And that's great. They wrote it though 100 years before that. Is that large oak tree or a different large oak tree? And so they weren't well defined. And as a result, when California became a part of the United States, we recognized the large landowners here, the Mexican and the Spanish land grants, but they had to prove that they indeed owned them. And so it started costing them a lot of money to be able to justify, to say that they own those parcels of land. And during that time, and they were predominantly cattle ranchers, so they relied on the natural rainfall. So what happened was, right at the end of the Rancho era, there were a couple sets of very, very dry years, right in here and right in here, where basically a lot of their cattle just died off. So they had huge legal bills protecting their land, and then they had all their cattle dying off. So basically they had to sell off all their lands. And so these farmers came in and started buying it up. This is the end of the gold rush era. They're all kind of done up north, and everyone's looking to go back to farming, and they're coming back into this area again. And farmers here, the new set of farmers needed water. They were growing barley, they were growing, their hogs, their chickens, corn, everything. And so it began the first era of water development in this area, which are the river diversions. So, and some of them started fairly early, actually. 1850 for Cumulos Ranch. Right here, they actually started a diversion at the rising groundwater area, right near LA County line. There was another one that was very early on in Santa Paula, but for the most part, they all started at about the 1870s. And if you see this map here, this was made in 1912, and every one of these red lines right here is it's a diversion, and then the green area are the areas that they were irrigating. So as you can see, by 1912, this area was pretty well getting developed by relying on river diversions. There were, and of course they did it either from the tributaries and down, or they took that water from the rising groundwater area and then delivered it down into various areas. These included ones, for example, in Piru. We had a diversion right there that came down and serviced this area right in here. And then we had farmers irrigation, which took from the rising groundwater in the Fillmore Basin and delivered down into the Santa Paula Basin down here. And then we had the Santa Clara River Irrigation District, which actually took the water from near where the Freeman Diversion is, and they delivered water down into, I think it's this line right here, and they delivered water down into this area. So this was all fine and dandy, except for, well, a couple things. There was water quality issues, as you can read right here. Iverson complained that the one in Santa Paula went through a hog field, and everyone was complaining that the water smelled kind of hoggish, had a hoggish aroma. So obviously this water was maybe good for irrigating, but perhaps not for drinking and for water use in the cities. But the real problem is kind of something that John alluded to, is that we have rainfall in the winter months, and we also have runoff in the river months in the wetter months. But then everything kind of goes dry. And if you look at, for example, the current demands out here in the Oxnard Plain, they go something like that. And here's the average or median surface supply right here. So again, you can see a deficit. And so river diversions don't work well for when you have the drier months. But nonetheless, people began to fight over some of that water, and there's a great example of that. Thomas Moore actually found he was on the losing end of a fight over river diversion, and he was actually the purchaser of the Rancho Sespe, which was right here. He thought originally he bought what was 6 leagues of land, which I think comes out to over 40,000 acres of land. It's an incredible land tract that was all the way from Santa Paula Creek all the way to Piru Creek, and it was pretty much that entire valley right there. It turned out that somewhere else in the land deed, it said 2 leagues, and he fought that with the courts for a long period of time. Finally, the court said, no, you only got 2 leagues. And as a result, squatters started coming in and started filling in the land and started living in the land that he said was originally his. And of course, he still kept fighting with them. And he was fighting with a man named Sprague when he was building his river diversion and kind of cutting off Sprague in this area right up in here. And it turned out that about a week later, Sprague comes out with a group of men. They come out, they burn up his barn, and he comes running out and they shoot him dead right there. And this became a long court battle and everything else, but eventually the squatters actually ended up walking away from it. They were originally sentenced to death, or a couple of them were, but they ended up walking away. So again, this was the first water battle probably out there that we know of. And fortunately, we haven't had any deaths since, so glad to tell you that. But so along with the river diversions, there was something that they were finding out in the Oxnard Plain in an area they call the pressure zone. And this was kind of rather unique in this area. And it's really, it's kind of neat to read some of the old accounts of what was going on. But we have the pressure zone, which is called artesian, that creates artesian wells. And so in the 1870s, the early 1870s, actually, they found that if you dig below this clay cap that we have out there in the Oxnard Plain, as soon as you get below that, there's pressurized water, good fresh water that just kind of shoots up through those wells. And so here's an example right here where they talk about in Hueneme that at a depth of 143 feet, they dug down, it produced 695 gallons per minute from a 7-inch diameter well. This is no pumps, it's just they dug down and all of a sudden you get incredible amount of water just coming out of the ground. And it threw, so what they do then is they confine the diameter, and then it actually ends up throwing it about 50 to 70 feet in the air. Pretty amazing. Lots and lots of accounts in the old newspapers about these, you know, where for example, Saviors had an artesian well that hit a torrent of sparkling water, and it made a terrific rush to the surface. It says throwing up gravel larger than a hen's egg. So again, this water is forcing even the dirt and the rocks and everything straight out through the well, and is coming out the other end. So with Daly, he spent $350 on his well, and pretty soon he's able to produce from 250 acres, he makes in the first year $8,700. So you can get an idea right here that it took a very small investment to make an incredible amount and make this area incredibly productive, actually. Probably the most famous artesian well came from Thomas Bard. He was our senator for a while, and he was actually the founder of Unico Oil, and he had a lot of property down there in Port Hueneme. He dug a well where they said, actually, I better read this one. It's for they dug a well, went 143 feet down and spouted 30 feet high. But then they said the men noticed fish in the wastewater. The well was found to be filled with young trout, thousands of them being thrown at every jet. It was asked if the fish could have come from the headwaters by some subterranean outlet. So they were wondering, it's like, well, and in fact, in another article I found, they said, well, we don't have the trout around here, but they're up in Santa Paula. So it's like, is there some sort of subterranean outlet that they can get through all the way down to the Port Hueneme down through this well? This one, and like I said, it became famous. It actually made Popular Science Monthly back then. It made Outdoor Life and Scientific American. Every single one of those articles, you know, they talked about this well and all of a sudden finding fish in it. I think we can only speculate what they saw, but I would say most likely they were running this well. Somehow fish spawned up there, and then somehow the little fish got, you know, sucked up. But anyway, we'll probably never know. It's lost in history, unfortunately. But Thomas Bard was a very reputable person. It's not like he made this stuff up. So anyway, fun little side story. And talking about how successful this area was, this is a good example right here of Jacob Mulhart. You might recognize the last name. That is our board member's great grandfather, I think, as I recall. And what had happened is he had, a few years back, he actually came with 3 children and not a cent in his pocket. He ended up renting land. He made a lot of money from it. He ended up buying 400 acres. And by now they talk about, he built a house and he had a fine parlor, and including a dance hall on the 2nd story. You know, so here you went from, you know, people were going from nothing in their pockets to a successful farming. And you know, granted, I'm sure it took a lot of work to get there. You know, that wasn't, but either way, this area was becoming, you know, just a huge breadbasket. We had water, we had everything that we needed. They thought this water was inexhaustible, meaning as soon as you dig down and you get that pressurized water and it shoots up, they thought it was going to last forever. They were wrong. You know, and a good example of that is Mr. Scarlett right here. He dug one 7 inches, shot 10 feet above the ground, but they didn't cap it off. What they did is they had to go down and make a lake for him. And then that lake, they put a boat on it so he could go duck hunting. And so again, you know, that was the attitude of, hey, this is just going to keep flowing no matter what. Well, they were wrong. So the area kept growing, went from lima beans, sugar beets, and farms kept growing. And instead of farming now as small farms, some of them got bigger and bigger into lima beans and sugar beets. And the Oxnard brothers came in and produced what is the sugar beet factory. They talked about right about the turn of the century, when this plant started going on and they needed a lot of water to produce, water levels went down 10 feet as soon as they did within a mile of that area. Again, going back to, so I expanded, going back to this, the precip right here, as you can see right in here, we had this massive decline. We had a drought. If you can see 2 years right here were these were the 2 driest years combined until I think, until just recently actually. And it was right around this time, right around the turn of the century, all of a sudden all those artesian wells started going dry. They weren't popping out of the ground anymore. And so, but there were really no worries. And the reason being is that exact time, somebody down in Los Angeles developed the deep well turbine pump, meaning now they can just pump that water. So it's going to cost a little more, but they still got it. So they weren't too worried at that time. We ended up going through a very wet period right after that. And this was an era, this was the era that someday I may talk about for steelhead. That was the era that they started bringing down steelhead and planting them like crazy. It was a very wet period. There's good connections throughout that entire time. But what was going on then was something that was a little bit different, is that people were coming in from Los Angeles, from different areas, and started looking at, well, this area's got a lot of water. We could use that, and we can actually export it out of this area. So now, again, though, it was fairly wet, so people weren't too terribly concerned at the beginning, but it started getting more and more prevalent. So looking at the watershed right here, we're going to go over some of those exportations. And this one really, right here was more of an interest. I don't know historically how important it was because I don't even know that it ever made the newspapers, but the two players in it were actually very interesting and relevant. But the idea there was two people came down and they were looking at putting two dams up in the upper Piru watershed. And they were going to then build a diversion and tunnel system that actually was going to take it down into Antelope Valley. At that time, Antelope Valley was actually growing. They were finding they can grow some almonds and a couple other crops right there. So these two men got together, Arthur Davis and Lippincott. They were both hydrographers and topographers for the USGS at that time. They were going out looking at the lay of the lands and doing contour mapping and everything else. And so their idea was they're going to put a dam there and put a dam here, and then actually put a diversion over to what is now Quail Lake up there. And then they were going to be able to distribute that water down into the Antelope Valley. Why this is of some relevance is because of who these guys were. And first of all, actually, I'm going to add that Lippincott, okay, so the way it worked is Davis was down getting money from all these investors. And then Lippincott was the guy who was up in the Piru watershed. He was stuck up there living actually in a tent. And he later wrote, about 40 years later, wrote Vern Freeman a letter talking about his events here. And he said that I maintained a tent camp in the region. My very good wife ran the camp for me, doing the cooking, and we lived throughout the winter in those mountains. So this is the upper part of the watershed. I stayed throughout the winter in the tent with a baby girl and some 2 years of age. I stayed with the work until I remembered giving my wife the last dollar I had. And so here they are up there in this little tent, living up there. And he talked about how he used to go out and survey the land. He actually even started digging the tunnel to get over to get over there. So it's probably to get out of the tent, but let's face it. So anyway, so who were these guys? So Lippincott was the guy up there, and then Davis was the guy raising money. Davis later becomes the director of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for 9 years. He was the co-founder of the National Geographic Society, which there were quite a few, but he also was the one who originally came up with the concept of Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam, which is probably one of the biggest structures we've ever built. And then Lippincott, we'll be hearing about later, but was an engineer for the U.S. Bureau. He became an engineer right away for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and also he had a lead role in the LA Aqueduct. So these guys, it's not like two people just going up there with a dream. They were very capable people who were going up there. And I think so. Yes. He never indicated that. Yeah. But anyway, it's a funny letter. And actually all of his work is sitting up in Berkeley, in which I'd love to go see, that he did up in Piru. But he actually said later on, he wrote in the letter, he said that I'm glad that this never went through. And because he said it would have gotten hung up in litigation. And also there really wasn't enough water there to be able to do that. So, yeah. So anyway, the second exportation was probably a bigger one. It was a bigger concern for the people of the Ventura County. And that was, it was a combination of the Moore Park Conejo Irrigation District and the Ventura Power Corporation. So the way most of these diversions and dams worked is they can make a lot of money generating the power, but then they also want to get, sell the water at the end. And so these guys got together and they looked at putting 2 dams on the Sespe, putting a conduit along the Sespe and an inverted siphon going across the Santa Clara River and delivering that water all to Moore Park and Thousand Oaks area. And it was actually going to be, let's see, I'll show you the totals in a minute, but this went on forever. And this really raised the concerns of the people of Ventura County. Sorry, going the wrong way. Then the last one actually, well, not the last, but another one was the Ojai actually got together a group of people and they wanted to put a dam up on the Sespe put a tunnel underneath the mountains, deliver that water into Ojai area. And they actually hired Lippincott to come and do that assessment. And he ended up coming up with a positive results on that one. And so what's interesting is all these guys did kind of a water availability study on this, but they all came up with incredible amounts of water in this area. There wasn't a lot of good data back then. So they were estimating on average, I think 500,000 acre feet is wasted to the ocean here. And that's just way over the estimate of what is going on now. So, and the people of the county knew that there wasn't that much water. And they also knew that these flood flows were what replenished our aquifer systems down here. But again, they didn't have the data. Well, here's the conduit in the drawing for Lippincott's plan here. So again, diversions were not unheard of at that time. LA Aqueduct was completed in 1913. That was, an amazing project where they took the water out of the Owens River area, shipped it via gravity the entire way, all the way down to LA, down to Los Angeles. And the main guy, the guy who thought of it was Fred Eaton, who was the mayor of Los Angeles at the time. The guy who really ran the whole thing was William Mulholland, also known as the chief. After he was done with this project, he became one of the most powerful people in Southern California. I mean, he helped create Los Angeles, right? They didn't have water before that. He brought down enough water, what they said was going to be enough for 50 more years. They were wrong again because LA grew like crazy. And then if you look at the third guy right there, there's Lippincott, the guy who was up in the mountains not too much before, actually, surveying and jackhammering the holes to get water over to the dam. So he also began to oversee the entire project. So anyway, all of these were potentially going to be extracting a lot of water. In fact, and at that time, actually, let me explain, is that the LA Aqueduct was doing just fine, but they needed a project to equalize the pressures and also start storing some water for Los Angeles. So they started building a dam. And this is Mulholland, who came in here and said, we're going to build a dam right here and deliver our water from the Owens Valley, and we're going to put it right there and store it right there. Originally he said, don't worry, we're not going to take that water. We're not going to take the water above in the watershed. We're just going to pass that through. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. He started building it. And as soon as they were building it, they ended up going in for a water right application to divert 400 CFS off of that system, and a total of something like 30,000 acre feet per year. That again raised everyone's concerns. And just so you know, this is a picture that somebody took from our predecessor agency. It was is the earliest known picture of the dam being built. And actually showed some key things of why it may have failed. But anyway, we're not going to get into that right now. But that's property of United Water, which is kind of neat. So if all of these were to have happened, we were looking at approximately over 1 million acre feet of appropriations out of this district. Again, we probably get about 250,000 acre feet on average per year down here. So there would have been hardly any water left. It would have been mostly local runoff. So in a way, they were looking at appropriating all of Sespe, all of Piru, San Francisco Dam, and that leaves us with pretty much some of the driest watersheds out there. So everyone finally said enough is enough. We need to do something. And it was Charles Teague who actually was the one who called the people together and said, we need to form an association, a group to start protecting these waters. And it was Teague, after he called for this meeting, 150 farmers came to the first meeting. So that was a substantial amount back then. There was obviously great concern of what was going on. And And they asked for a voluntary fee of 25 cents per irrigated acreage. And this was loosely, this is not a government recognized entity. It was basically a protective association that really had no legal standing. But they knew that they needed to protect these waters out here. And so basically what they said is, first of all, we need to investigate how much water do we have here and show the people that we need this water. And they knew that we had local talent here to be able to do that assessment, but they said that this is going to go to litigation. We need to hire somebody with a lot of credibility. So they ended up hiring a man named Grunsky. He was very credible at that time. He actually designed the sewers for San Francisco. He was on the Panama Canal Commission. He was director of the Museum of Academy of Steinhardt Aquarium. And he was also president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So he is very credible. We hired him. He did a quick assessment. Within just a few months, he came back with it. And he said, basically, that any deliveries of water to the region outside of the drainage basin of the river or beyond their area underlying the gravels fed to the river would be detrimental. And that was the information we needed to be able to go to the State Water Resource Control Board and show them, hey, we need this water. And these people are just coming up with, whatever they want to start hauling the water away. Our first battle came with Mulholland. And so after Mulholland filed the water rights, we had a meeting with them, and basically, actually we had a meeting with the State Water Resource Control Board, and it was called something else then, with them, and the head of the State Water Resource Control Board said, well, it's obvious we don't know enough information, so we're going to do a percolation test. Why don't we release water from your dam and see if indeed it goes out to the ocean like Mulholland was saying. And so we did, and they designed it so that we'd start releasing 100 CFS, 150 CFS, and keep releasing it to a point where you see how fast does it go out to the ocean. Mulholland's comment was, you guys better have fast horses because it's going out there fast, and it's going out to the ocean fast. And it turned out, this became this percolation test actually became a big deal. They had 11 engineers from LA County, or from LA. They had lawyers there. There were consultants all coming there. It was a big group of people because nobody had ever done a percolation test before. And so this was the first. And so anyway, they did the test. They released all that water. And they kept waiting. People were waiting down at the confluence of San Francisco Creek and the Santa Clara River, and they kept waiting and waiting. The water during the entire test never even reached there. It all percolated into the ground. So that gave us the information that we needed. That was like right there. Anything that you guys block, is not benefiting the groundwater basins. So that was a win. But we tried to work out a deal with them and with Mulholland, and we were supposedly in a meeting with them, and the lawyer turned to us and said, why are we even talking to you guys? You're not even a legal entity. And so they actually did not reply to us in some of our proposals. So it's very interesting. And that's really why they said, you know what, we gotta, instead of becoming this loose association, we need to become a recognized state group. So we became the Santa Clara Water Conservation District in 1927. And again, Teague was, he was chairman of the other group, and I believe he becomes president of this group. But again, this is, so our mission was then is to first protect our water rights against encroachment. This is out of the board minute meetings, against encroachment, and then the question of spreading the waters on the gravels, meaning the conservation. So here we are, protect and conserve is what we were started out doing, and then that's what we still do today, right? Interestingly, also during the first board meeting, this is just a little side story here. During the first board meeting, 3 men came from San Francisco Creek area, and they came to said, we need to fight, Mulholland, because they're going to be taking all the water, but also we could work out a deal where they hold back the flood flows and release them at a controlled rate. And the 3 men were named Chester A. Smith, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Ruiz. And so anyway, they talked to the group, talked to our board members, and we agreed that we need to continue pursuing this. This is 1 month before the failure of St. Francis Dam. So, as you know, it all came tumbling down in a rushing torrent. We probably all know this story. Some 400 lives were lost, but the man closest to the actual dam who survived was the man who was one of the men who was in our board meeting. Chester Smith was the one who was talking about our water rights and how we need to protect them. And he describes here how he was actually nervous. And the reason being is that he saw those cracks in the dam on the west wing wall and water was coming out. So he talked about how he went to sleep with his door open so he could listen to if the dam were to break. And anyway, it did. And he said, let's see, I ran when I heard that noise. The dog awakened me. I could hear it coming, hear the trees breaking, and I could hear a big pole snapping. I could hear the wires of electrical poles going. I knew what was coming because I'd been there in the floods before. Anyway, he got out of it, obviously, because this is in the coroner's report. And the reason why they wanted to meet with him, because there were rumors that somebody blew up the dam, and he was so close that they kept asking him, did you hear an explosion? Did you hear an explosion? No, no. And so that kind of sealed the deal that it was a failure from something else. So Chester did fine. Unfortunately, Mr. Ruiz didn't. He was lived right below him in St. Francisco Dam. And basically him and I think his 4 children all perished, and his wife all perished in the dam. And actually the other guy too, the third guy too, that came to our board meeting the month before also did not make it. So anyway, we obviously our fight with Mulholland was over at that point. And so we did begin to focus on the water conservation part of it. And this is where Vern Freeman comes in. He was our engineer for the district at that time. And he came up with a plan to start building these spreading grounds, diversions and spreading grounds. And here we go. You can see the investment costs. The initial investment costs were not too bad. Pyrus spreading grounds, $18,000 annual operating cost, $1,000. So anyway, and then he had Sespe spreading grounds, which obviously didn't materialize. And I think those ended up going to build the Santa Paula spreading grounds. So over time, this one here is the Pyrus diversion. You can recognize that bridge is still here. The riverbeds dropped quite a few feet actually. So the diversion is much bigger when we have to stage up that water. This is the Santa Clara River near our Freeman diversion. This is what I always tell everyone was pre-Freeman diversion. And then this is our diversion in Santa Paula Creek right here. The other thing we used to do is something called scarify the river. So when it was drier out, they felt like if we rip up the riverbed, it'll percolate more within the river. And so we used to have this tractor would go out there and just kind of rip it all up right there. So here's a video of the project as we were this is 1933 actually, this video. We didn't have a flushing channel back then. So as sediment came into our intake, of course, they had to dig that all back out again. But that's Santa Clara River, probably, just a little bit downstream of where the Freeman diversion is today. That's an image right there. So yeah, we would have been up there further. right now. There's the diversion going down to our percolation ponds that was designed by Vern Freeman. And there's the percolation ponds. You can see, it's hard to see it, but East Ventura would be all this area right here. No condos there. Satakoy is coming up right here. And then here's the Santa Clara River. Here's the 118 bridge right here, existing, where the existing 118 bridge is. Here's the Piru diversion, which we currently don't operate, but it still is there, ready to operate. And we should have, and there's the Santa Paula Creek diversion with its spreading grounds. I think that's Vern Freeman there, but I usually can recognize him when there's a pipe in his mouth, because he almost always had a pipe in his mouth. Anyway, and then it's going into the spreading grounds there. Oh, there he is. That's Vern Freeman right there. Oh, that's Santa Paula diversion right there. Yeah, with this pipe. Yeah. There's a picture of our at the Vern Freeman, you know, for our permitting, there's a picture of a man with a pipe in it, the drawing, and that's him with the pipe on it. So, yeah. And this one was screened, if you noticed. Did it already? I wasn't paying attention. Oh, they bought these. These are our stream flow measurement devices. They were $125 each back then, which seemed like a lot of money to me, but I found that. And oh, there's our fish screening device. So actually diversions back then had to be screened. And the reason being is that the state would not bring down trout down to this area and plant steelhead or trout unless diversions were screened in the rivers, because they didn't want those fish that they're bringing down to come down into these intakes right here. So we actually screened our diversion there. There's Santa Paula Creek. If I can pass, there we go. Okay, so eventually the other groups kind of faded away as they saw our success in fighting our water right with Mulholland and showing that we needed this water. They began to realize, and also there was a lack of funding, they began to realize that probably they're not going to have a good project there. So as time went on, they faded away. They didn't reapply for their water rights, and time went on. So after we started diverting and doing our percolation, we went through the wettest period on record ever known, and at that time. And we had some really big wet years, and things were doing well. Water levels came almost back up, but not all the way back up. But what then became the focus was flood control. So at that time, there was no flood control district. And so the county ended up forming the watershed, well, what is now the Watershed Protection District, which was the Ventura County Flood Control District. And with that, they ended up, the county supervisors actually tasked them to come up with a study for flood control, but also for water conservation plans. And in that study, they ended up, because it was so wet, they looked at the Santa Clara River as being okay again. They looked at, and they said, well, what we really need to do is put a dam on the Sespe and ship that water back over to Thousand Oaks, Zone 3, which is called Zone 3, ship that water back over there to Thousand Oaks and Moore Park and Simi area again. So here we go again. You know, it's like, you know, we solved it, get another wet period. Everyone forgets that, you know, that we kind of needed the water here, and they're shipping the water back over again. And so again, our agency said, Well, and also I just want to add that things had grown here. The population was growing, and you can imagine, you know, these labels were being shipped out all over New York, Boston, everywhere in the winter. They're looking, you know, so when everyone goes to the market, they see these labels, right? And, you know, it can be freezing there. And it's like, so pretty soon they're like, you know, let's go to California. So California became, you know, had a huge growth spurt at that point in time. And it could be attributed, a lot of people attribute a lot to those labels right there. But over time, we grew. And so the Oxnard, the irrigated acres went from, you know, 1910 to about 10,000. And by 1948, we were at 74,000. And again, another picture of the irrigated acres. So basically the Santa Clara River Water Conservation District said, well, okay, so now the county is looking at removing water and sending it over to the Cayugas area. We need to do another water supply report. And this time we hired Harold Conklin. And he, again, showed that because we've grown so much, there's an additional increase in our usage of about 30,000 acre feet. And he looked back to the previous drought and said, well, we had water levels going down to well below sea level. With this extra pressure of another 30,000 acre feet of being extracted, we can't have that. We can't lose that water. In fact, we need to do something now. And it was more than just the groundwater recharge project that we had. And so his recommend was develop and file for water rights on the Sespe and Piru. We did that. We filed for those water rights. And now there's 2 different water rights in there. So eventually the county pulled their water rights and the Cayugas came in and said, okay, we also are filing for Piru and Fillmore water rights. And this is basically where the real fighting starts. And in part is because this is also the first time we saw seawater intrusion actually detected in the wells along the coast. So here we went through this really wet period. We went through a couple dry periods. Pretty soon we saw seawater intrusion happening. We saw that we didn't fully recover the way we used to in the past. So we knew we were going to have a problem. And as a result, finally, I didn't include that the Santa Clara River Water Conservation District was really only farmers. The cities didn't join in on this group. And they weren't that concerned at the beginning, but finally they were. And so the city of Oxnard in 1949 supported developing a plan to organize a water conservation district under the Water Conservation Act. And basically they said, let us, our predecessor agency, become this new organization. And that's when we actually become United Water Conservation District. In part, it allowed us to raise bonds, get money, and actually build dams. So, but again, the fighting had just barely started, and this is actually where I end this part of it right here. But we go through a terrible drought, and you'll see that it goes back and forth. Quite amazing. But again, you know, to summarize, we've been fighting forever. We've been fighting over this water forever. And it's, again, you know, it's like to remember, we're fighting, you know, to be able to maintain this so that we can turn faucets on here, so that ag out there can grow its strawberries and everything else. And we continue to do that. It's in a different form now. Nobody's trying to ship water over to Thousand Oaks anymore or to Ojai. But it's part of a fight that we have continued to do today. And we'll discuss more about that in the second.